All right, we're back. We have Erin Sorelle joining us. Erin, thank you for being here with us today.
Tyler, thanks for having me.
So just so you can explain to those watching both on live stream, also the recorded on YouTube. All right, give us the perspective, the audience here, upon what you do, your research, and kind of your understanding from a broad perspective. We'll dig in deeper to specifically bird flu, but also this kind of zoonotic diseases, all those things that you work on.
Sure. So I'm a virologist by training, so I actually worked on avian influenza for my master's and my PhD, but I've since transitioned to more global health focused work and looking at from a One Health perspective, so thinking about animals, the environment, and humans, how we work together, what are our systems, how can we better coordinate for a One Health response, both in terms of preventing disease and then also being able to respond in a coordinated way.
Very interesting.
Perfect. You are the best person. And what's funny is, like I mentioned, we were at Cornell together. You wrote an article roughly a year ago. You co-authored an article, and it was talking about the kind of finding bird flu on a dairy in West Texas. So what I want to do is just kind of for the audience, for myself, why is this bird flu such a big deal?
Yeah, great question. And how much time do you have?
I mean, we got whatever time you got. Let's go.
Time you got.
My students would be rolling their eyes right now. So this particular bird flu, so there's a bunch of different types of bird flu. All flu comes from wild aquatic birds. That's the reservoir host. So the seasonal flu that we vaccinate against every year, that originated in an avian species. So they are the host reservoir for all flu viruses. This particular strain of H5, so we look at H5N1 as a characterization of the virus. This particular strain has been circulating really in North America since late 2021, but was really first detected in the Northeast in the winter of 22. And it came through migratory birds. It happens all the time, but this particular strain hit hard. It not only affected poultry species, like that's the traditional route, but we started to see this virus pop up in wild mammalian species, and typically that doesn't happen. The virus really likes
wild what?
Mammalian species, meaning not birds.
Like
so
deer.
Anything like deer, like fox. So this virus tends to go avian to avian, so bird to bird, right? It doesn't like human cells. It doesn't like mammalian cells. This strain did. And it could effectively infect both poultry and different wild animals. And we even saw massive die-offs of marine mammals with this virus. And so it became this interesting, from an epidemiological approach, an interesting investigation, why this virus. But if we fast forward to a little under a year ago, in March of 24, it was the first detection of this virus in a cow. And that was really unheard of. This was not something that the dairy industry or the beef industry was ever thinking of from a disease risk factor perspective. This is something the poultry industry is experts on. And so it was quite a challenge when that first arose in cattle.
What was the challenge with the cattle? What was that problem?
So the way that the virus presented in cattle, I think, really stumped vets because they have their kind of differential diagnosis. They have their typical disease that they consider. Avian influenza is not one of those. But a fantastic vet in Texas noticed that barn cats around that farm and others were getting sick and looked ill, and that the cattle seemed to be displaying different symptoms. And so she thought, let me just put this as a differential diagnosis. Let me test for avian flu, just to cover my bases. And because of her and her ability to think outside the box, H5 was detected in cows.
Wow. All right. Let's kind of go into this, because I think how most people experience it, other than maybe there's a headline that you randomly see on, Wall Street Journal or New York Times, like I did, and granted, coming from the dairy industry, and also knowing what was going on, having friends in West Texas that were kind of involved, whatever, and speculation, what it really came from. For the everyday person, I came from agriculture. You have a background in that. Alex doesn't. Fair enough.
I'm the everyday guy.
It's like, where is this, like, okay, as you just described, bird the flu has been in birds. That's the host. We're used to it. Now all of a sudden we see it jump across into mammalian species. Oh, this is different. But now when we have this backdrop of why are my eggs so expensive? Why do we have food inflation the way it is? Why do we have, people getting sick from working with these animals? How could you, for example, an everyday person that like Alex, why is this such a big deal?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
We got
big
time.
deal.
We got time, Erin.
Okay. Big deal on many fronts. So, Alex, tell me when I lose you, and we'll.
I'll follow up.
Okay. So if we can think about it from different factors, right? So if we think about wild birds interacting with backyard flocks, so thinking about, we have, and Alex, this goes to the idea, right, of organic eggs. We have backyard flocks. We have organic certified, which may not actually be in a backyard or open space, right? Depends on how eggs are certified. And then they can be in these closed poultry houses, right? So much larger, densely populated. When wild birds migrate or sedentary birds, so birds that stay in one place but are wild, interact with these domestic poultry species and they have influenza, they transmit the virus, or they expose those animals, those birds, through what we call a fecal oral route. So essentially, the wild birds they have the virus in their feces, and then the domestic birds get exposed to that. They then get infected. Typically, an H5 virus that's highly pathogenic will infect a population of birds, and it will be very evident very quickly. So typically, you will see cases within 48 hours, and you might even see deaths within 48 hours of a highly pathogenic H5. So it was very easy to detect in poultry because the poultry production facilities are experts in this surveillance. They know to call the vets, and then they know to respond. Typically, people that work in poultry houses have certain what we call PPE, or personal protective equipment, and that will range based on their risk factors. So if you notice you have sick and dead poultry, you are automatically going to think about avian influenza. It's going to be one of your top ones. And so you're going to respond quickly, and you call your state vet. And they'll do testing and be able to say yes or no, that's what it is. And then you can respond effectively. And there are protocols in place to think about. Typically, you do depopulation. So you essentially cull the entire population of birds. So that farm loses their population. You use
gone, Alex.
Gone.
100,000 birds on a farm, gone. Is that fair?
So before we hopped online, I looked. About 163 million poultry have been affected by this outbreak.
That's why eggs are so expensive.
Say that number again.
163 million.
Wow.
Do you happen to know by chance, Erin, what the size of the U.S. flock is? I don't.
No, I don't.
I'm guessing it's much, much bigger than that. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I didn't look at that. I looked at a couple of the big producers, let's say, of eggs. So if we look at like Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, there's some big egg producers. And just to give an example, Ohio, and I'm going to look at my notes here, produce about 10 billion eggs a year.
Okay.
One state, 10 billion.
Wow.
Now that is one of the top 3 to 5, right? But if you're culling that many poultry, right, that's why your eggs prices are skyrocketing. Now, some of those are egg producing and some of them are meat producing, right? So you've got different types of poultry, and they're both susceptible and they're both affected. In the U.S., we do subsidize. So that is good. We subsidize our farmers when they lose and they report. It incentivizes reporting of disease, but it's still a massive loss, not just that farm, but the community that farm is in. And so it's a domino effect. And now that has happened across the country for over 3 years.
Okay. And then the correlation to now the dairy industry, right? Because you said that there's a crossover strain. What is that? Is that affecting cows the same way as chickens? Like, do they just euthanize cows?
No. So it's interesting. The cows don't get that visibly ill. So they kind of look like how we would look if we had flu, runny nose. They're lethargic. They don't want anything to do with anybody.
How sick we are.
Yep. And so they have to go offline, right? They can't necessarily be milked. But before they started showing symptoms, they were online. They were being milked. So now and what we've learned is that the virus is excreted in high titers, or the raw milk can be infectious. So you're looking at cows that go through a milking parlor and are hooked up to equipment that goes cow to cow. You also have a worker who might be at eye level to that udder. And so everything that is anywhere near that udder could be at risk of exposure, particularly with splashes if personal protective equipment isn't worn, and if the equipment isn't cleaned and disinfected correctly.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So they're not euthanizing these cows. They're getting sick, like much like we are, and that's affecting the production of things like milk, and also like how about like beef wise? Because you mentioned poultry with the chickens.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There hasn't been, we haven't seen the level of cases or any real report of H5 in beef cattle. It's really been the focus on dairy. So if you think about raising chickens and cows, and I'm going to go way outside my expertise here in about 5 seconds, but you can raise a chicken in 6 to 8 weeks, put it to market, right? Meat wise. So I can feed a chicken for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, raise 35,000 in a house or more, and they all go to market. I then decon my house and I bring in 1-day-old chicks and I do it all over again, right? That sounds easy. It's not. It's a really tough job, right? And then you look at cows. I'm not bringing a cow to milk or to market in 6 to 8 weeks. That cow takes a lot of investment in raising and then putting that cow online for milk, right, or meat. That's a massive investment and a lot more time. So the way that we can quickly respond to an influenza outbreak in poultry cannot happen in cows. We've been very lucky that this virus isn't lethal in cows. There have been cows that have died because of the infection or have had to been euthanized because of the infection, but it's not to the level, it's not as pathogenic, meaning it's not going to kill the cow. But the cow does have to go offline until it's recovered. So that is at a loss for that particular producer, right? And it can, if we were wide scale outbreaks, state to state, you would start to see an increase, right, in milk prices.
One of the things on that perspective, Erin, and talking to some of my former peers in California, in the dairy industry, as what they've said anecdotally, every dairy in California has been affected.
Yeah.
And what they're seeing is, pretty much cow gets sick, much like the flu. What's very interesting is and I wonder how much, this is my, call it inquisitive brain. I couldn't sit through introductory bio at Cornell because I didn't like the professor long enough to get where you're at. But this idea that I wonder how much of the impact is because of the concentration in milk. And that is really a transmission factor, why we're not seeing it in beef animals as much to the extent of cows, because you're not seeing that cross. You may see from a cow calf, like a cow suckling or calf. Okay, great. But you're not seeing multi-transmission because of milk. Whereas like dairies, milk's everywhere, right? So that's very interesting. But what I find from people talking about is like, hey, once a cow gets a bird flu, she's done for that lactation. She pretty much goes dry, doesn't really produce much. And so, she's producing, like I explained to Alex, 100 pounds a day, and she goes down to 10 or 15, which you're not going to collect. That's a lot of money. And what people have kind of told me, it's a 14 to 15% is what they're seeing. This is what's been told to me. It's not research, not whatever else, but just kind of this perspective that can become a big deal if it, goes on throughout the year much longer. And I think, on the backdrop of all this, we talk about egg prices. Alex, I think we understand why egg prices are the way they are, right? Why you want to go buy sliced turkey and it's not there. It's hard to find. Why? Because those birds are affected. The other fact that I look at here is this is just a bigger overlay on our whole food industry, that when you start looking at choices, what can we eat, not eat? All right, if I don't have eggs available, am I going to go eat more meat? Well, that puts more pressure there. It just, it makes a big deal in all of agriculture.
Yeah, Erin, I was going to ask you, you mentioned, so when I read these headlines, like most Americans, USA Today and all the New York Times about bird flu, I know why it's affecting egg prices, and I'm reading articles about egg smugglers coming through the border now. It's just like, I was sending it to Tyler. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But that makes sense. So, but it's not so much.
I wouldn't want to fall down if I was smuggling eggs.
No, we're nothing.
What's that yolk all over you? You smuggling eggs? it's not so much the transmission to humans though, but you did mention that, and I read some articles like Wyoming man gets bird flu. Like, is that a concern for us as a populace in the States? Is it's that we could get this virus and it could spread to us at a large scale? Like, is that something you guys look at and study?
Uh, yes is a short answer, but I would caveat that with there's two. I would break that into population A and B.
Okay.
And so I think that when you look at disease outbreaks, there are always a vulnerable or high risk population, right? And so if we want to make it as simple as possible, I would say the high risk population is agricultural workers, those that are working in poultry farms, in milking parlors, that are working with livestock day in and day out, and their families and their communities, right? To me, that's where the effort needs to be focused on, the attention in terms of access, education, and resources, right? So you look at the reports that are coming out, and they are coming out delayed because there has been a restriction on CDC publishing some really critical information on H5 surveillance in both veterinarians and in agricultural workers. But it is coming out, so that's at least good. Is what we're seeing is that there are people who have known exposures, who have had symptoms, but are afraid to get tested. And I think the challenge there is sometimes people don't necessarily get the same type of healthcare access or days off. And so there's a concern, of course, of having access and understanding that there is treatment and care available. A lot of times you'll see the family members of those workers agree for testing so that we are getting some data on exposures. But I think a better understanding of the risk for exposure and then access to testing and access to care. But I will say, having very limited experience working with cows, you're going to get bumped around a lot more and get bruises and get hurt more than you're going to be worried about like a sniffle or conjunctivitis. Right. So I think the challenge is understanding that these are serious symptoms. 2 years ago, we would, probably people would have given you a hard time for it. Right. But this is something you actually need to go get care on and get tested, because if it is H5, you are risking the health of your family, your pets. We've seen dairy workers that have actually infected their cats. And so it's not just you, and it's not just the people on in your crew, right, that you're working with. It's your community, your family, your pets. And so I think that's a much higher risk than Americans that aren't working with livestock on a daily basis.
Is this similar symptoms to like the regular flu, like congestion, coughing, sneezing?
A little bit. There seems to be a lot of conjunctivitis, and people can argue it might be just the way that you're being exposed. Versus typical aerosol infection, like when we cough and sneeze and catch flu from each other. But it's going to be even more challenging now because the U.S. is in one of the worst flu seasons in the last few years. And we've just had our HHS secretary block flu campaigns.
I just saw that, yeah.
Yeah, so we are now not getting critical information to people who need to understand, and I'm talking about everyone in America who may not have gotten vaccinated and are thinking, oh, you know what, this is a rough flu season, maybe I should. There's still time to do so. They're not getting access to that critical information. So we're trying to play catch up with a virus that can evolve much quicker than we can handle it with limited information. So that's been quite challenging.
Awesome. Erin, as we wrap up here, just give us pie in the sky as we address this. Well, before I go there, there's a question. Is this mostly North America, US, or like, according to your information, your contacts, are they seeing this strain of avian bird flu affecting Canada, Mexico, other surrounding states, or is this just a US problem?
It's a global problem. It's just hit the U.S. harder than others.
Why do you think that is?
If I knew,
you can go off the cuff.
I think when you look at migratory flyways, the U.S. has 4 of them. You look at the way that we raise livestock, particularly poultry and cattle. It's very densely populated in certain parts of the country that happen to be also by flyways. And the way that we currently raise dairy cattle in particular a barn is not a barn is not a barn, right? So I grew up in upstate New York. Barns had doors and it was cold. But if you think about other places like Texas and California, where it's much more of an open air barn, wild birds and even local wild birds, right, flying in and out all the time.
Yeah.
So we have to rethink how we do certain things to limit the exposure and the risk factor, not just for avian influenza, but potentially for other diseases to our livestock industry.
I mean, I remember when I was doing nutrition, I mean, the amount of money that would be lost because of birds eating feed was sometimes like extreme. Like 2 to 3% of your overall cost is disappearing because of birds. Birds are a problem. Wild birds, coming in, flying in, flocking, roosting, all those things, defecating everywhere. It's a major problem. And I think the thing that you bring up is that's one of the difficulties we have in part of our systems. And, even I go back, Alex, I joked, hey, raise some birds, right? Okay, you raise your own birds. They're outside and they're pecking around, but there's a wild bird flying over that's defecating. Right. They all of a sudden are now exposed to the bird flu. You're not exempt from it because, I raise my own birds. This is just a big ag problem. Big ag doesn't help it. It's just a matter of, it's not a plus or a minus. It's a problem we all got to deal with.
Yeah, I feel like there's always a bird flu outbreak at some point, like every few years. Is that true, Erin? Like this is like common bird flu, a type of, even though it evolves, it evolves pretty rapidly, but it's been going on for years, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I would say from an H5 perspective, there have been reports of highly pathogenic H5 infecting humans since 1997. Okay. And it's sporadic, right? Usually it's 1 or 2 cases that just is direct exposure to a bird, and it's usually pretty high fatality rate. So this virus is weird. It's not killing people the way that traditionally we've seen H5, but it's also this massive host expansion. So if we want to give the virus a little credit, it's really smart in expanding its host range. And the longer we let it replicate and infect cows, a mammalian species, so cells that look similar to ours, we are giving the virus the ability to mutate, adapt, and be potentially more infectious to us or being able to transmit better human to human. And so that is, I think, from a research and the basic scientist, right, the virologist, that's something that is of extreme concern. And we will never be able to predict, right? We can say these are some mutations that look like it's getting more human-like based on the data that we have. But it's a very challenging situation. So the more data we have, the more reports we get, the more access we get to these viruses and can sequence them and understand if they are adapting, how they're adapting, will help us then with mitigation measures for human exposure.
And I guess my last questions is like, when you're looking at this virus under a microscope, like what are you looking for? What do you look at? Like, oh wow, there's like these little things that move around, and like that's not supposed to be there. I just want to get that view in my head.
Yeah. So think of it as if you're looking under a microscope, you're going to see the virus is going to look the same regardless of what it came out of.
Okay.
Okay. So think of a circle with little spikes, and those spikes have little circles on the top. What we're looking at is on those little circles on the top, what is a sequence of that? And does that sequence allow for better attachment to human cells? And if so, then that's something to be concerned on. So we're looking at it at the genetic level to be able to say, this virus has had a mutation. So I can take a virus that went from cow A to B, and if it looks and I can say, okay, cow A was the index case, right? The initial case, she transmitted to cow B. Cow B's virus, if it looks different, would indicate that cow B was able to support replication and that virus replicated and adapted in cow B. And if those mutations look more human-like, then I'm going to raise a red flag, right? They might look different, but they don't raise a red flag, but it's still mutating, right? So that's still information for us to understand that the virus isn't happy enough in that host to just go without mutation. Right. So if the virus is continuing to push and evolve, Some of the mutations may not be necessarily anything to worry about, and others may indicate that something's cooking.
Got it. My last question, I guess this would lead to like a solution. Is that cow vaccinations or I don't even, do cows get vaccinated? I don't even know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They do.
But it's also, I would say, from a perspective of fight, and this is where there's a large part of our society, right, wrong, or different. You talked earlier about, the new HHS secretary saying, hey, I'm not going to push, like we've seen, the flu vaccine is a solution for so many people. All right, wrong, or different. Well, the same on cows. We have such a drive towards organic because that is wholesome and better. It's like, hey, we're not doing vaccinations there. And so when you look at that, it's like, it's a challenge. So that's my perspective. Erin, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's two different species we should be thinking about, right? Poultry and cows and humans, right? We can get vaccinated, at least with seasonal flu, and we should be. So PSA for anyone out there who hasn't gotten vaccinated, please go get vaccinated. We have in our national stockpile. So from a human health perspective, we have a national stockpile of vaccines that if there was an emergency, we could vaccinate a percentage of our population while we then produce more. We have a stockpile of H5 that is shown to be effective on the currently circulating virus. I will caveat with the current circulating virus does not transmit human to human. So I don't know if the virus that we have stockpiled will protect us once if the virus, I should say, mutates to be human to human. Could we use that virus vaccine stock to vaccinate agricultural workers at risk? Yeah, we could. Canada has just secured, I think, something like a couple million doses to vaccinate at-risk individuals. So there are countries that I think are thinking this way and are going to be proceeding that way. We also can think about vaccinating poultry. In the US, we vaccinate and we treat poultry with lots of antibiotics, but we don't vaccinate against H5 or any other flu. And there are export issues with exporting meat that has been vaccinated or birds that have been vaccinated. The idea is it would be hard to tell if a chicken was naturally infected and recovered or vaccinated, but there's a lot of great technology out there that can actually differentiate between the two. So it's an easy fix. I think it's just a long process to advocate and revise policies and procedures and bureaucratic issues, right? And I'll caveat with that some of that is good to think about, and the challenges, just the impacts of vaccination. But it seems like the new administration is considering it. I think mainly because of the pressure of egg prices. I think that egg prices is driving this decision. For cows,
one little egg causing so many problems for so many people.
Yeah. And I think for cows, it's a whole different ballgame because they're not dying, right? We're not having to cull cows, and this may not be the biggest threat to cows from a health perspective. But we have seen now that the virus is not, we cannot contain the virus in cows right now. Right. And so something has to be done. What we're doing right now is not working. And where we see outbreaks in the poultry sector, it very much looks like they're getting contained at the facility level. They're not being spread by people, by trucks, by equipment. We don't see farm to farm spread. We are seeing farm to farm spread in cows. So we've got to do something there, and it might not be vaccination. I don't know, but I think it's a different evaluation between poultry and cows on the vaccine front. But I think there are some vaccines that are being tested and evaluated for it.
Awesome. Well, Erin, thank you so much for joining us. This has been very enlightening. It's fun to catch up with you. It's fun to hear from you. Thank you for this, and appreciate you sharing today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Erin. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
I've learned so much.
Good.
So, Alex, there we go. We learned why egg prices are so expensive.
Nuts. Yeah, it's nuts.
What's the biggest thing that shocked you that Erin shared?
Well, I love learning new things and understanding, because you read the headlines like most Americans. You read this headline: egg prices at all-time highs, and viral videos of people fighting each other for freaking eggs. And you're like, why? Like, what is going on? And then you go to the store and there's no eggs. And so you dig and now you just kind of understand, like, okay, this is why there's this shortage of eggs, and it kind of, in a way, it calms me down. It's like, okay, there's a bird flu that's reducing the production of the eggs from these chickens that produce it. I'm sure at some point it will calm down, and it will get more eggs. If I can't buy organic eggs, I'll just buy the ones in the purple
Yeah.
or the yellow
Yeah.
crates. And that's me personally. It's just like, now I understand, and that's where a lot of like the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, like with people, come from. Is just they don't know, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, now I understand. Like,
Well,
this is how it
and I
gets
think
transmitted.
it's,
This is how it happens.
Erin made the point there at the very end, which I think is great, is there's going to be a lot of pressure to support the poultry industry because of the price of eggs. And as she talked about, and looking up the numbers, how many birds have been euthanized, because that's the solution, right? Once they get sick, they're either going to die, or you just, hey, we'll clear off the whole barn so it doesn't, and clean it up and start over again. Well, as I was talking to my wife, I said, part of the problem is the problem. In order to have more birds, that means more eggs have to go into hatching for birds to be, to be raised as layers, to
Right.
be raised for meat. And so that means that's that many eggs brought out of the system. Now, it's not exactly the same, but there is some crossover there. But there's also, how big of an industry do we have built upon creating new birds? And it's like, all right, now we only have such a big enough system. It's kind of like, as Erin mentioned, the turnover in birds is a lot shorter than it is in cows.
Right.
But I also know this for like the beef industry. There's only so many operations that are set up to have new babies. And all of a sudden we've been short of animals in the beef industry. What's the solution? Oh, we're going to go have the dairy industry create babies for us, because they need a cow to have a new calf in order to produce milk. They don't need so many females every year. We have better technology to sort semen, so you have, just females born instead of males. And so it's a slow system, but I, look at that as like, this isn't going to be a quick fix.
Yeah. Especially in the dairy industry. I mean, because like she mentioned, like chickens, they grow much quicker, right? There's a faster path to production, whether it's for poultry or for egg creation. But for cows, because they take so much longer to grow, right, and be a producer of milk or to become beef, that process takes a lot longer time. What is the maturation period, Tyler?
So, I mean, typically in most operations, a cow will have a calf either as a beef calf or as a dairy calf, somewhere between 22 and 24 months of age. So it's a 9-month gestation cycle. So they're getting pregnant, 9 months before that. And so then you think you have to, cycle that. Well, again, it doesn't mean every baby born is going to be a female. I mean, there's a portion of them that are males, and depending on, the different semen that you're using, is it going to be, potentially for more females, males? And so it's a very slow cycle. Here's the challenge. And this is what's difficult. She mentioned earlier, and I'll give you perspective here. Erin mentioned that the poultry industry is very hard. You'd say, hey, 6 to 8 weeks, we have new birds, right? Well, the margins are like razor thin. So the profit of that entire operation may be just one cycle of the entire year. And you lose one cycle because they're all euthanized. You're now fighting from behind. Do I even stay in business? Okay. That's potentially a poultry industry. Dairy industry is much the same. All of a sudden I have 1,000 cows on my farm, pretty average in the US now, and 14% of them all of a sudden got bird flu, are no longer producing milk. Well, my margin might be 2%, And so you're telling me I just lost 14% of my productive capacity, but guess what? I still got to feed them until they have another baby, or I have to sell them and hopefully get money to sell them as beef, turning into, a beef product. It's a very tight line on profitability. And so I think, to me, that's the bigger concern is, not only we talk about this, all right, it's affecting the supply of chicken and turkey and eggs. Okay.
Right.
Making that short. But then as well, we look at the effect on the dairy industry. All right, are we losing some production? It doesn't show up every day, and it's a pretty global market. But now all of a sudden we have this effect on an industry that is reducing the profitability at already very tight prices, and we don't want to see dairy prices and egg prices go higher because
Sounds like
people
they
are
will.
complaining about it, and you're
Yeah.
like, it's a very tough spot.
Yeah, I mean, just the pocket, right? The pockets of average Americans, milk and eggs, right? It's like the two common thing. And I know,
Yeah.
like I don't. They've already increased. We've talked about this throughout the last 12 months, right? The increase of milk and just groceries in general. And I can't imagine, another spike of 20% going to milk, which I buy a lot of because I got 2 little kids. That's going to really affect pockets when poultry beef is already expensive. I just went to the store, ribeye, one ribeye, bone-in ribeye, I don't know, that big. It was like $30. Used to be price at restaurant. Now those are 70, 80, 90, $100.
Yeah.
It's just I can't imagine another 20% spike in
Well, and I think that's where you look at eggs, that probably, all the different factors, typically, and this is part of the challenge in the dairy industry is if we were to see that much of a price increase, and I read a story, I think I shared this with you, is like people are very reactive to price ups on eggs, not price downs. So if the price goes up, man, they stop buying, it gets cut off. The price goes down, not much change. And very much happens in dairy industry, and 1% consumption can be in 1% national consumption can be the difference between having a thriving dairy industry or a struggling dairy industry. That's it. That's all it takes is if we have 1% higher consumption in the US and all of a sudden, man, farms are doing great. They're expanding. Life is awesome. 1% down. And it's like, I don't want to be in this industry. It is, I'm losing money every day before I even wake up.
Sorry,
it's such a challenge. Agriculture in itself is very challenging. It's challenging because the factors we've discussed this morning, but it also it's very capital intensive.
Yeah.
The cost to operate a 1,000-cow dairy is multi millions.
Oh, I bet.
And when you look at a thin margin, it's like, hey, you may have a $3 million a year, $5 million a year, income, but you maybe made 50 grand. Dead serious.
Yeah, I bet, dude. That's I was thinking about this. So, over the last 10 years, and I see it in the Florida, like we've had this expansion of milk types of milk, right? Macadamia nut milk, almond milk, oat milk, right? So
all those are alternatives.
Right? So I get like, okay, maybe, we have all these alternatives for milk if the dairy industry takes a big hit. But eggs, like I don't see a alternative egg solution, which I don't know. I was just thinking about that.
But I think part of this is also like we've now start to see the consumption of those alternatives go down because people are starting to understand, we have milk produced by a cow who makes it herself, who eats, food to make that, as opposed to I'm going to go take this oat, I'm going to go put it into a facility, add a bunch of chemicals, add a bunch of additives and all those things, and now you're going to drink that slurry. And so we're worried about a natural product produced from a cow, natural sugars, or this that you've produced in essentially a laboratory. And we've seen over the last couple years, that the consumption of those alternatives have really dropped because people are realizing, hey, that milk's a whole lot healthier for you.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that.
I think
I'm one of those people.
Well, we're caught in that because now all of a sudden you're just like, well, is it a cost? Is it a preference? Is it a health factor? I think one of the things I learned today, and I appreciate Erin sharing this, and to me, I made the comment, it makes so much sense to me, is if the concentration of the flu virus is significantly higher in milk than anything else like respiratory, urine, fecal matter, whatever else. Oh, that's why people, it's nothing to be milking cows and get milk on you. That's just a part of the process. It goes in the milker, it splashes around, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like that's just normal. And so for that to be such a risk, it's like, ooh, well, here's the other factor. She didn't bring it up. I'll bring it up. I don't know. People have different opinions.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'm wrong here. Pasteurization, I think, has been proven to kill the virus. Now we have a proponent of, hey, let's drink more raw milk. Let's drink more raw milk. Let's drink more raw milk. And you kind of look at that as like, that's a little risky, because we just learned the flu virus is much higher concentration in milk than any other thing. And now we want to drink raw milk that doesn't have any, anything to kill any of those viruses at all. Ooh, and what do most people do when they buy raw milk? Do they drink it themselves? Not usually. They're feeding it to their kids.
Yeah.
And so they're more susceptible. And it's like, don't be scared of milk. But it's also, hey, there's different types of products. If you want to, you can go to different types of pasteurization where it's lower temp. We go into a lot of things. It just, when we look at the effect of the bird flu, instead of thinking, whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big deal. And organic's not the solution, as I hopefully learn. Hey, that's just as much or a bigger risk.
Yeah. No, it is. It's a big deal. I look at it more from the lens of knowledge, and so it's like it doesn't scare me now so much now that I know about it, but it is a serious situation. That's true. Especially when you start the egg smugglers. Once you start smuggling anything into a country,
there's a problem.
There's an issue.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that is supply, but we didn't ask Erin. I wonder is, what's the transmission of the bird flu in eggs? Maybe not, because she pretty much said once they get bird flu, I mean, they're going to be dead and gone in like 48 hours. But you think about it, you have this asset that's laying eggs. You have this big operation laying eggs. You collect eggs every day from these birds. And then all of a sudden you have bird flu that goes through. Instead of producing, you have 30,000 birds or however those large operations. One day they're producing a lot of eggs. Yeah. And in 2 days, you got no eggs.
Done. Nothing.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts. It's crazy.
What's something else from a perspective from your view that you learned that Erin shared?
Oh, I mean, I like when she was talking about, when she actually looks at a virus and the mutation. I'm just super interested is like, what are they looking for? And how she described the little tentacles and how those things, that's where they're looking, because they're looking at it from a genetic perspective, I think she said. I'm just interested in like how these living, if you think about it, these viruses are living cells or living things, right, that are in our body. We all have, these microscopic organisms that are inside of our bodies all the time, fighting and battling, which is crazy to think about. Like, we're these functioning, super smart human beings, right? And then in our bodies, there's these like microscopic organisms that could kill us.
That are kind of along for the ride.
Yeah. It's crazy. So
on our skin, in our body, part. It's kind of, it is crazy.
Yeah, so that was interesting. It's just how these things evolve and why they evolve. Some of it we don't know, but that was really interesting to me, is the evolution of these viruses.
One thing that struck me, and again, knowing this but not really stopping to think about it, is the fact that this has been around for a couple of years, winter of 2022, where they found this latest strain, but migratory birds are the source. And you think about that, how are we stop the pigeons that fly by your house? Like, you look outside and okay, there's all the birds that are flying north. All of it. They're carrying it. And, one of the things that I mentioned, and just give you, think about swallows or sparrows and magpies and pigeons, those are typical birds that we would see on farms, around farms.
Right.
Wild geese, those things. But I mean, they're flying into barns. They're, going into any of the different, the feed that's laying around. Birds are just going there. It's like, what do you do to keep them away? And that's where it's like, you think about it, it's really hard. If you had chickens yourself, man, and I want to protect them from any birds, you got to put a big canopy over them. You got to make sure there's no birds that get in there. You got to keep it like totally sealed off, so those birds don't end up eating any droppings that fall in your, if you think, I'm going to have 6 birds out behind my house, so I'm going to have some eggs. Man, you're just as risk at any of, probably more than the large operations.
And you see, no, I think you're spot on. It's like, and especially have like a little pond,
Yeah.
ducks and geese, those
All
things
of it.
shit everywhere.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. And if those are on your property,
Yeah.
and they will, I just saw some flying last night overhead, like they're everywhere, and they're, they land in that pond, good luck.
Yeah. Well, I think the point that goes on that a little bit farther is you think about where like Ohio, Iowa, major bird chicken areas, right? Yeah. She gave the numbers. I looked up the stats. Iowa's actually the number one chicken state. Didn't know that. Ohio's number 2. Okay. I knew Ohio was up there. Anyways, if you think about where the birds migrate, are where a lot of those facilities just happen to be located because of city centers. You think of population, you think of available resources, farming, all those things where processing is like, oh yeah, this is kind of a bigger deal. And it's the layers that impact it. And it's not just, well, let's just easy solution. Like, there's no easy solution to this.
Well, one thing, we're going to be on top of this, and we're going to be monitoring it. So
we are.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much more news to cover. We didn't talk about Elon. We didn't talk about Doge. We didn't talk about, all those things. More to come.
There's going to be a lot.
We'll keep watching that. Elon asking everyone to email, what did you do last week? I honestly, and I think it's kind of funny because there's some appointees that supposedly said, hey, just ignore it.
Yeah, I saw
But
that.
at the same point is, I think there's a lot of people like, I didn't do jack last week. And, it is what it is. It's like the classic Office Space. Have you seen those things going around where the guy's like, tell us what you actually do here. But I'm important.
Excuse me, sir.
I'm sorry.
Reports.
I'm sorry. Here's my take on that real quick. I have a friend who works for the U.S. government he works in the construction part, and he's been a little upset about this. I haven't talked to him, but just watching his commentary on Facebook, and it's like, here's the problem, buddy. Those of us that work in the rest of the world, we have that every single day from our clients.
Right.
What are you doing? What have you done? Tell me what you're doing. That's normal capitalistic in entrepreneurial world, whether you work for a company or not. And you're actually being said, like, dude, your feet are on the fire. And in each one of us, I think I've had that at more times than others. And I talk about this in my roundtable. Just last week we talked about it. And it was funny because one of the recent podcast guests, he said, hey, what's one thing that you wish all leaders could do and would do? And he goes, take time to think.
Yeah.
And so when you stop and think about the disparity between what we've seen in a lot of government agencies, how they actually work, again, it's been reported what actually they do compared to a lot of companies where I don't even have time to stop and think. And if I were to stop and think, people would say, why aren't you working? Now, that's the reality of a world. And all of a sudden now we have a lot of these governmental agencies what do you do?
And to the email thing is funny. I would imagine they, with these young geniuses he has working for him, they could probably log into their computers, right? And just be like,
well, then they have that software. That software, this became popular during COVID, that it moves your mouse automatically. So it looks like you're, dude. There's like all those hacks.
Yeah, maybe. But just like, be in your email and just, I don't know. I would figure there, but anyway, it's interesting. Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot, there's massive layoffs in federal workers, and it's going to start.
Yeah, but then Apple's added, they just announced this morning, 20,000 jobs they're going to add first quarter.
They got trillions of dollars. They can do whatever they want.
Because people like their product. They're great at marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to get a new phone. My battery's like fried.
You need to get a new one. I was going to tell you, Tyler.
Okay,
you need to
thank
get
you.
A phone.
Thank you.
A Samsung or iPhone?
Dude, I'm a blue circle, okay? No green here. I'm blue, all right? It is Apple. Everything's connected. But, man, well, today was fun. I learned a lot. I appreciate Erin. This is the first time we've had a guest on the Newswire. It was fun. I hope everyone watching, listening, watching the recording that you learned something, because I obviously did. And Alex, you did as well.
Tons.
Yeah,
awesome.
it's a whole new perspective on the bird flu. I'm grateful and thankful. Remember, if you're watching live on LinkedIn, we also have post the recording on YouTube. You can go through the whole collection. Make sure you hit subscribe and the bell when you're on YouTube, so that way you get notified whenever we drop new content, whether it is a newswire or the Tyler Dickerhoof Show podcast. Any final words, Alex?
No, I mean, stay safe out there. Grab your eggs. Be kind to people. Be kind.
There you go.
They're just eggs.
They're just eggs.
Don't go crazy.
Don't go throwing elbows when you're trying to.
Not worth it.
Eggs.
Not worth it.
Yeah, no, nobody, like, when you drop eggs, that's like gold on the streets. Like, can't do that.
Oh my God. Yeah. So be kind. That's my.
No. One last thing I'm going to remind you is the Impact Driven Leaders Summit, May 7th and 8th, Spokane, Washington. Make sure that you get in reserve seats for that. Go to tylerdickerhoof.com/2025 summit. Would love to have you there. We're going to have an amazing array of speakers. With that, till next time, choose to lead with impact.